Revenge with Karen. I knew the moment that little weasel shut the blinds it wasn't going to be a performance review. The air in the HR conference room smelled like lemon-scented betrayal and whatever cologne middle managers buy when they think alpha energy comes in a bottle. Then he said it, just like that, no hesitation, like he was ordering lunch. Your pension is an acceptable loss. I didn't flinch, not even a blink, just stared at him the way you stare at roadkill you didn't mean to hit. He smiled like he'd won something, like making a woman who'd given 27 years to the circus disappear with a severance, and a paper folder made him king of the office jungle. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply slid my company badge across the polished table, the same way I used to slide legal memos to executives too lazy to read their own risk disclosures. I picked up my cardboard box, the one they so generously provided, like a consolation prize on a game show called Guess Who's Getting Screwed Today, and I walked out. Past the receptionist who couldn't meet my eyes. Past the intern who'd once asked me how copyright law worked over lunch. Past the digital employee appreciation sign flashing a looping gif of balloons. By the way, if you're still listening and haven't subscribed yet, me a favor and hit that button. Over 97% of folks just sit back and listen without clicking. And trust me, watching those numbers go up is the only kind of team motivation we don't have to buy donuts for. Anyway, I walked out of there not just with my desk trinkets and my signed coffee mug, but with a quiet, razor-sharp kind of anger. The kind that doesn't yell. The kind that remembers exactly where the bodies are buried. See, that smug little puppy in the HR room? He was new, wet behind the ears. Still thought LinkedIn endorsements mattered more than institutional memory. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that back in 2004, during a licensing restructure they barely remember now, I negotiated something. Something important. Something they didn't read because they never think the quiet ones keep receipts. But I did. I always did. Somewhere in a fireproof lockbox in my garage, sandwiched between a notarized memo and a yellow submarine lunchbox, my kid gave me for Mother's Day 2008 was a covenant. Not a clause, not a footnote, a covenant. It tied my pension fund, yes, my personal pension fund, to something they valued just enough to cry over but not enough to understand. The company's 14 core patents. They were the foundation of the tech stack, brainstem of every product they'd ever pitched to investors. I'd watched their R&D team build on top of them like they were invincible, like they belonged to the sky. But they didn't. They were collateral. And 20 years ago, in a boardroom that smelled like dry erase markers and sour coffee, I made sure my name was inked into the debt structure like a curse waiting to be spoken. So I went home, took off my heels, opened a bottle of Tempranillo, and turned on the porch light. The sun was setting pink over the neighbor's trampoline, and I smiled, because tomorrow I wasn't calling HR. I was calling Marcus. And Marcus doesn't talk. He repossesses. The year was 2004. My hair was still brown, my knees didn't pop when I sat down, and the company, back then a jittery mid-tier startup clawing at its Series C, was too broke to pay out proper pensions, but too proud to admit it. They called it a temporary freeze on retirement structuring, which was HR speak for we're out of cash, but please keep building our empire anyway. That's when I saw the opportunity. I was in the room not because they wanted me there, but because the general counsel forgot to uncheck my calendar invite. Execs were tossing around words like patent monetization and licensing leverage like kids playing dress-up with their daddy's legalese. And buried in that mess was one golden word: collateralization. They were desperate. Their foundational patents, 14 of them, covering everything from proprietary AI sorting trees to the user interface they now sell to hospitals, were being bundled up to secure a licensing line with a European tech firm. So I raised my hand. Instead of delaying my pension contribution, I said, why not secure it against the collateral itself? They laughed. Not in a cruel way, more like I'd asked the bartender if she could fix the economy. But then I put a draft on the table. One I'd written that morning after seeing the agenda. It was airtight. If the company failed to meet its retirement obligations to me, even partial default, my pension fund would convert into a senior secured creditor. And what secured it? Those 14 shiny patents. Every one of them. The CFO at the time, a sharp but exhausted woman named Marcy, read the clause 3 times, then nodded. Cheaper than a lawsuit, she muttered. It was signed, notarized, stamped with a company seal and forgotten. Well, they forgot. I didn't. Now, 20 years later, I sat on the floor of my garage, dust puffing out from cardboard boxes labeled Kids, ART 2006, and Christmas lights do not throw away again. I pushed them aside and reached behind the breaker panel to pull out the fireproof lockbox. Combination still set to my daughter's old locker code. The hinges creaked like arthritic elbows as I cracked it open, and there it was, tucked between an expired passport and a photocopy of my marriage certificate. The covenant. Paper had yellowed slightly, the ink still sharp. Whereas it began, the employee Diane C. Fulton and employer Neuratech Inc. Do agree. I ran my fingers over the raised seal, remembered Marcy's tired eyes, remembered how the VP of product had snorted when I suggested patents could ever be at risk, felt the warmth of vindication buzz behind my teeth. They'd treated me like a relic, a clerical fossil, an acceptable loss. But fossils are made of rock. Some rocks explode under pressure. I folded the covenant, slid it into a fresh plastic sleeve, and placed it gently in my old briefcase, the one they gave me for my 10-year anniversary. Strategists don't throw tantrums, we plan. And I'd been planning this move since they hired that little smirk with a haircut and called him head of workforce optimization. They think they ended my career, but all they did was flip my trap card. Marcus picked up on the second ring, like he always did when the name Diane Fulton showed up on his caller ID. "Tell me you're not calling about another HOA dispute," he muttered mid-yawn. "I've got something better," I said. "You still deal in secured asset recovery?" He paused. I could hear the shift in his tone through the static. "Legally, always." Marcus Prescott wasn't just some JD, turned detective for hire. It was the velvet-gloved sledgehammer you called when your billion-dollar company forgot which drawer it left its soul in. Back in law school, he was the only person who read boilerplate clauses like poetry. While the rest of us drank cheap beer and crammed torts, Marcus annotated licensing footnotes for fun. We hadn't talked in years, but I knew his number by heart. Don't forget the people who helped you break your first merger contract like a piñata full of golden parachutes. He arrived the next morning. No tie, aviators. A coat that said, "Yes, I invoice in 6-minute intervals." I handed him the covenant across my kitchen table, next to a half-empty mug of stale Folgers and a stack of utility bills with my name crossed out in red Sharpie. He read it once, then again, slower. By the third time, leaned back and whistled low. "Diane," he said, dragging out the vowel like a reverent curse, "this is real, told you. No, I mean it's enforceable, not just technically. This clause gives you first lien priority on all 14 patents listed in Exhibit A, which means they defaulted. I'm now a secured creditor." He nodded, eyes scanning the fine print, "and not just secured. Senior position. That means if you pull the trigger on this, you skip the lawsuits, skip the settlement games, you go straight to the jugular. The patents legally become claimable assets. They'll scream bankruptcy before they let that happen." I stirred my coffee. The company's preparing a merger. His eyebrows jumped like popcorn. With those patents in play, I slid a copy of the merger press release across the table. He read it silently, then chuckled. "Oh, this is perfect," he said. "They're over-leveraged. They've priced the patents into their market cap. They're assuming no encumbrances, which makes your covenant the equivalent of a hidden bomb strapped to the hull. They terminated me without reading the fine print." "Well then," he said, standing up and stretching his back like a man about to hit a golf ball through a cathedral window, "it'd be rude not to educate them." I raised an eyebrow. "We're not sending a memo, Marcus. I want them to feel it." "I'll handle the paperwork," he said, slipping the covenant into his leather case like it was the Ark of the Covenant. "And Diane, I'll only ask this once. Are you looking for compensation?" "No," he smiled, slow and sharp. "Good, because if we're doing this my way, they won't offer money. They'll offer begging." He left with the papers and a glint in his eye. I stood at my kitchen sink, watching the wind chimes rattle on the porch, and thought about all the times I'd stayed late to clean up compliance reports. All the thankless hours, all the condescension, all the soft sexism wrapped in corporate niceties. They thought I was gone. They thought I was quiet. They never realized I was armed. And Marcus was the bullet. I was eating a lukewarm bowl of microwave fettuccine when the press release hit my inbox, forwarded by an old colleague with the subject line, "You seeing this circus?" I clicked it open with the grace of a woman who already knew exactly how the story ended. Neuratech Inc. announces strategic merger with Swedish health tech conglomerate Velmedics AB. I snored hard enough to inhale a noodle. Strategic, my ass. They slapped lipstick on a balance sheet and hoped the Europeans wouldn't notice the rot under the hood. They'd scheduled a virtual town hall for that afternoon, complete with pre-recorded video statements, a LinkedIn blitz, and quotes from the CEO about synergy and global alignment, that sweet corporate smoothie of optimism, buzzwords, and impending disaster. But buried beneath all that confetti was one line that made my eye twitch in delight. The combined intellectual property portfolio, particularly Neurotech's proprietary AI engine and diagnostic schema, is projected to drive a 37% valuation uplift in the merged entity. Translation: they just bet the farm on the very patents I had boxed up in legal crosshairs. Even better, the valuation increase was already reflected in their public filings. Their stock had popped 11% on the announcement. Investors were foaming at the mouth. Journalists were praising the deal like it was the second coming of Jobs and Wozniak. I scrolled further down and saw a headshot of my replacement, some kid named Brent, aged 29, with Director of Ops Strategy under his name, was wearing a mock turtleneck and holding a reusable coffee cup like he'd invented time management. Brent had posted the same press release on his feed with the caption, "Huge day for innovation and teamwork. Proud to be part of the future." I nearly printed it out just to spill wine on it. They were flying too close to the sun on wings made of optimism and unpaid invoices. And they had no idea that an old clause, inked in quiet confidence 20 years ago, was about to snap them in half. Marcus called that evening, voice dry as Arizona gravel. "Did you see? Like watching a man juggle knives over a bouncy house," I said. He chuckled. "They've committed fraud by omission. They listed the patents as unencumbered in their S4 filing. And they sent that to the SEC," he whistled. "Oh yeah. On the record. Which means if we act now, we're not just reclaiming assets, we're detonating their merger from underneath." I swirled my wine glass, feeling the satisfaction settle low and warm in my gut. "They're going to blame a junior analyst," I said. "Probably Brent. Good." I took a screenshot of the press release and saved it in a folder on my desktop titled Funeral Prep, because the bigger the announcement, the louder the implosion. And if there's one thing you learn in corporate law, it's this: loud victories make quiet clauses very, very dangerous. Dance their little victory lap in front of the whole world. Cameras rolling. Smiles painted on like clowns at a doomed birthday party. They thought they owned the future. I was about to remind them I owned the foundation. The subject line was clear enough to make a lawyer sweat bullets. Notice of secured creditor action, intellectual property collateral enforcement intent. Marcus had drafted it with the kind of precision that could make a scalpel jealous. Legalese so elegant it practically hummed when you read it. 4 pages, bullet-pointed exhibits, original covenant attached, and one unmistakable line in bold. As of this filing, the undersigned represents Diane C. Fulton, whose pension trust is the named senior creditor against the IP portfolio detailed in Appendix A, herein referred to as the secured collateral. Seizure proceedings will initiate within 10 business days if debt breach remains unaddressed. It was sent at 9:02 a.m. on a Tuesday, strategically timed so it would land in inboxes during that vulnerable, pre-coffee window when even general counsel has their guard down. It was addressed directly to GC at Neurotech.com. CC'd, legal at Neurotech.com, board chair at Neurotech.com, and one personal email Marcus had on file from a merger years ago. It should have lit the place up like a Christmas tree dipped in kerosene. Instead, went straight to a junior legal assistant named Trina. Trina was 24, working hybrid, and 2 months into her first real job. She got the email, skimmed the subject, saw the words pension and seizure and attachment, and assumed it was a phishing attempt. She marked it as suspicious needs IT review, then went back to making pastel slide decks about regulatory compliance workflows she didn't fully understand. I didn't know any of this, of course, not until later. At the time, I simply made tea, sat on my porch, let the summer bugs rattle around in the grass like God's maracas. Marcus called me that night. "They haven't responded," he said, tone neutral. "Expected?" I asked. He exhaled through his nose. Could be delay, could be arrogance, could be incompetence wrapped in Outlook filters. "Let's give it time," I said. "Because see, there's a special flavor of satisfaction in not chasing people who think you're irrelevant." I'd spent years being the ghost in the system. The one who fixed licensing misfires, redlined patent language, filed compliance briefs no one read unless a fine was on the table. Now they had one job, read one damn email. And they didn't, because Diane Fulton didn't matter anymore. Because the systems they built were too big to fail, too perfect to audit. Because Marcus's notice didn't come from a VC firm or an angry shareholder, it came from a name they didn't bother remembering, so they ignored it. Until 2 days later when Trina, bless her overwhelmed heart, forwarded the message to her supervisor with the note, "Not sure, but I think this might be real." By then, the deadline clock had already started ticking. 10 business days. That's all they had. And by the time someone with an actual law degree opened that attachment and saw my name on the covenant, the first domino had already tipped. Emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7:30 a.m. on a Friday, a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding before markets opened. Marcus had given me the rundown. He wasn't in the room, but he knew people who were. In our world, panicked silence travels fast. Picture this: 12 executives and 4 board members dialed in from overpriced condos and walnut-paneled offices. Half of them still in golf polos, other half trying to pretend they'd slept. The outside counsel joined late, breathless and pale. She was holding a printed copy of the covenant like it had bitten her. "This clause," she said, flipping to page 2 and stabbing it with a pen, "is authentic, enforceable, and under current Delaware code, binding without amendment." Silence. One of the board members, the guy who made his money off cloud storage and horse farms, blinked slowly, saying she can actually take the patents. "She doesn't need to take them," the attorney muttered. "They're already hers." That's when my name came up. "Who the hell is Diane Fulton?" snapped the CFO. "The ops legal liaison they terminated last quarter," someone else muttered. "She negotiated this." They all looked around. No one had the answer. It got worse. The general counsel opened my personnel file, a quiet little PDF that had lived in the company's HR folder for 27 years, untouched except for generic performance reviews. Suddenly, it was tagged urgent legal hold. They scrolled through my record like archaeologists uncovering a tomb they'd pissed on too soon. Every compliance memo, every footnote, every email I'd ever sent with the words contractual protection or binding precedent, and it was now under forensic review. Then came the real punch, a line from their own internal valuation sheet. Core IP portfolio contributes 67.4% to projected 10-year revenue modeling, based on proprietary diagnostic schema and algorithmic engines. Translation: without those patents, their merger was dead. Their market cap, inflated by ghosts. Without that IP, Neuratech was just another overpriced software company with a half-built app and a dream. Tried spin. Someone floated the idea that they could refactor the IP in question, build a workaround. Outside counsel shut that down fast. It's not just the software, it's the language, the system architecture, the UI sequence. Even the Gotham training materials reference protected diagrams. If you try to fake it, she can sue again and win. By 8 a.m., the boardroom was chaos, voices raised, blame flying like shrapnel. Someone brought up Trina's name. She'd flagged the email too late. Someone else muttered about Brent. Ah yes, poor Brent. Apparently, he was the one who signed off on the SEC filing that claimed the IP was unencumbered. His LinkedIn was already on lockdown, and me? I was sitting on my porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching hummingbirds hover over the feeder I'd hung last spring. My tea was still warm. My phone was face down. I didn't need to listen to their panic. I just needed to wait. Let the timer run down. Let the walls close in. Let the men in tailored suits and bloated egos scramble to fix a mistake they didn't even know they'd made. For 27 years, I had been the one cleaning up behind them. Quietly, precisely, invisibly. Now, I was the one thing they couldn't clean up. I was the clause they overlooked, the curse they unlocked, and I was just getting started. The call came from a blocked number at exactly 6:13 p.m., just as the sun dropped low enough to make the dust on my window blinds glow like gold. I let it go to voicemail, then another, and another. By 6:22, there was a text from Marcus. They finally figured out who they're dealing with. At 6:45, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an assistant I vaguely remembered from a leadership retreat years ago. Voice trembling like a kid calling their teacher mom by accident. "Miss Fulton, CEO would like to speak with you." Privately, I said nothing. Just sipped my chamomile and let the silence sweat on his end of the line. We'd like to propose a settlement," he continued. "Full restoration of pension benefits plus back pay plus a..." Substantial gesture of goodwill. Define substantial. 7 figures, plus non-disclosure consideration. I laughed. Not a dramatic cackle, just a flat, amused exhale, like a woman watching someone try to put a house fire out with a damp napkin. I appreciate the creativity, I said, but the repo team is already en route. Silence. I could hear muffled voices in the background, someone whispering, someone swearing. Papers being shuffled in the frantic way only executives do when they realize their fancy titles don't come with insurance against idiocy. He cleared his throat. Diane, let's not escalate. Merger closes in 48 hours. If this situation delays it, both parties lose billions. Then maybe you shouldn't have referred to me as an acceptable loss. He tried to pivot. Look, we value your legacy. Everyone in the company does. I smiled and stared at the framed copy of my 10-year anniversary certificate, still crooked after all these years. Funny, I said. Didn't feel very valued when you axed me with a smile and a severance folder. Another pause, another muffled conversation in the background. And then we're prepared to revise the offer. Higher number, equity options. We can even include a reappointment if that's something you'd consider. I stood up and walked to the window where my porch light buzzed against the rising dusk. My eyes landed on the manila folder still sitting on my coffee table. The covenant, the relic, the loaded gun. Tell your CEO, I said. Window for negotiation closed when I handed over that covenant to someone who knew how to read it. I hung up. No fireworks, no speech. Just a cold, clean line severed. Justice isn't loud, it's surgical. Marcus called 10 minutes later. They tried to buy you out. Yep, you say no, of course, he chuckled. Good. I already scheduled the asset enforcement order with the Federal IP Recovery Unit. They'll be there before lunchtime tomorrow. Perfect, I said. By the way, he added, you just became the single largest secured party in the history of their company. Is that so? Yep. And Diane? Yeah, they're terrified of you now. I didn't reply. Just stared out at the twilight, watched the wind tug at the curtains, and let that one word settle in my chest like a stone in still water. Terrified. Took them long enough. The vans rolled up at 10:04 a.m., black, unmarked, efficient. 3 of them. Out stepped 6 federal IP enforcement officers in navy jackets and khakis, like librarians who moonlight as bounty hunters. Clipboards. Badges. Court orders so crisp you could slice an ego on them. The receptionist tried to wave them toward visitor check-in. One of them politely handed her a folder. Inside, an asset seizure directive signed by a federal judge, effective immediately, and they walked straight through the glass security gates like Moses parting the Red Sea of keycards. It took exactly 4 minutes for the company Slack to explode. Who are these guys? Is this real? They are unplugging the demo lab. Why are they boxing up the mainframe? By the time someone got legal on the line, 2 of the officers were already in the executive suite, tagging prototypes, collecting hard drives, photographing every document that referenced the patent portfolio in question. The crown jewels, those 14 core patents, were no longer theirs. They belonged to me. And the repo team didn't argue, they executed. The diagnostics code was locked down. Schematics for upcoming product lines were sealed in tamper-proof bags. Training systems were shut off mid-session. A team of IT specialists, contracted through federal enforcement, owned drives and seized version histories going back 10 years. An intern reportedly cried when they took the tablet he'd just finished formatting for the merger demo. Meanwhile, the CEO, he was pulled out of a lunch meeting with investors. Tried to puff up when they told him what was happening. Demanded they pause all activity immediately. They didn't even blink. One of the officers handed him the warrant. He started reading it, chest heaving, halfway through page 2 before he stopped cold. This is her, isn't it? He whispered. Diane Fulton. The name hung in the air like gas before a match strike. PR tried to keep it under wraps. Sent out a damage control memo about a routine audit verification. Didn't matter. Some junior staffer leaked a video of the agents wheeling out sealed crates labeled Neurotech IP Secured Recovery Order 81B. Within the hour, it was on Twitter, LinkedIn, then CNBC. By 2:00 p.m., the stock had dropped 19%. By 3:30, it triggered an automatic freeze. Velmedics, their merger partner, issued a statement. We are evaluating recent developments related to Neurotech's IP portfolio. All discussions are paused pending legal review. Translation. We just found out we were buying a $2 billion sandwich made entirely of air. Marcus sent me a screenshot of the chaos. emails flying, threads burning, an emergency all-hands scheduled for 7 p.m. I was sitting on my back porch again. Same tea, same blanket. The birds didn't even flinch. He texted, "Cleanest execution I've ever seen." They walked in, tagged everything, walked out. No shouting, no resistance. Just pure surgical justice. I replied, "They finally read the clause, not yet. They're too busy choking on the consequences." That night, news anchors speculated whether this would go down as the most catastrophic internal oversight in a corporate IP case since the Sinclair collapse. Comment sections were brutal. One user wrote, "Imagine firing the one person who knew where the bodies and the patents were buried." Another simply posted, #Fulton effect, I didn't post anything. Didn't need to. The job was done. Not loudly, not with a vengeance speech. Just paper, signatures, and timing. I hadn't raised my voice. I'd raised the floor out from under them. And as I rinsed my teacup and turned out the porch light, the only sound in my house was the soft, mechanical whir of justice, finally running on my terms. The press conference was scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp, but by 8:07, the CFO still hadn't made it to the podium. I was already settled on my porch, wrapped in my old college hoodie, coffee steaming in one hand, remote in the other. The feed buffered twice, probably too many people watching the train wreck in real time. Finally, there he was. Ronald Evers, CFO of Neurotech, red-eyed and trembling behind a row of microphones like a man about to propose to a firing squad. He adjusted his tie 4 times in 20 seconds. Didn't help. Due to unforeseen, legacy contractual complications, he began. Board of Neurotech has voted to withdraw from the proposed merger with Velmedics. Behind him, one of the board members stood up and walked off camera mid-sentence. No words, no handshake, just gone. I took a slow sip. They hadn't mentioned me by name, of course. They couldn't. Saying we got outplayed by a woman we fired and forgot doesn't exactly soothe shareholders. But they didn't have to. I was in every silence, every nervous blink, every second of flustered spin and corporate doublespeak. They said complications. I heard checkmate. My phone buzzed gently on the side table. "Marcus, congratulations. They're yours now." I didn't smile, didn't cry, just stared out over my porch, railing at the soft glow of morning pushing back the dark. There was dew on the grass, a lone squirrel wrestling with the bird feeder. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then went quiet. I took another sip of coffee, let the heat sit on my tongue, let the silence do its work. Across the country, journalists were scrambling for quotes. Analysts were redlining stock charts. Boardrooms were being scrubbed, and Neurotech, they were learning the difference between cost-cutting and consequence. 27 years of quiet, invisible labor, one forgotten clause, one underestimated woman, and now I owned their foundation. No applause, no parade, just this moment, me, my porch. The sunrise, and the sound of a billion-dollar empire, cracking like old paint behind me. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.